4 burners on the stove. She only ever turned on one. When you live on a fixed income, dinner isn't about what you want. It's about what's left. The Social Security check arrived on the 1st of the month. By the 20th, the money was gone, and the kitchen got very quiet. There was no one to complain to, no one to split the grocery bill with. There was just the stove and the silence. This wasn't a choice. It was an arithmetic of survival, and it was solved every single night by men and women who refused to fade away. These are the 30 forgotten meals that seniors living alone had to make. Number 30. Crackers and canned sardines. Nobody wanted sardines because they smelled too strong. They came in too small a tin, and they reminded you of the kind of poverty you didn't talk about out loud. But a tin of sardines cost 19 cents in 1973. And laid out on saltine crackers, they kept a person going through an afternoon when nothing else was in the house. The oil in the tin was the meal too. You dragged the crackers through it so nothing was left. A retired coal miner in eastern Kentucky ate them every Friday without fail. He said they tasted like the ocean. He had never seen the ocean in his life. Number 29. Creamed peas on toast. A can of sweet peas cost 17 cents. Heated in a small pot with a spoonful of butter and a splash of milk, stirred until the liquid thickened and the peas turned soft at the edges, then poured over a slice of white bread that had been toasted in the oven. It was the kind of meal that sounded like nothing and filled you like something. A widow in rural Ohio made this every Tuesday through the winter of 1971 and called it supper without apology. The bread soaked up the cream from the bottom of the bowl before she was halfway through. Nothing was wasted. Number 28. Fried mush. Leftover cornmeal porridge, cooled overnight in a loaf pan, sliced thick in the morning, and laid into a cast iron skillet with bacon grease already hot. The outside crisped into a thin shell. The inside stayed soft and dense. It cost almost nothing because it was made from what was already there, from the porridge that didn't get finished the night before. A grandmother in rural Indiana served this for breakfast 3 mornings a week through the entire decade of the 1970s and called it a hot meal because it was. The butter melted into the crust before it hit the plate. Number 27. Potted meat on bread. A can of potted meat cost 11 cents in 1977. 2 slices of white bread cost less than that. It wasn't a sandwich in any real sense of the word. It was protein and carbohydrate and enough salt to make you feel like you had eaten something real. The meat spread thin across the bread, edge to edge, so it covered the whole surface. For a widower in rural Mississippi, this was lunch, every day. Not because he liked it, because it required no stove, no preparation, no standing. He kept 12 cans in the cupboard at all times. Running out of something that cheap felt like a failure he couldn't afford. Number 26. Stewed prunes and oatmeal. A bag of dried prunes cost 61 cents. Simmered in a small pot with a little water and a spoon of sugar, they turned soft and dark and almost jam-like, the skins loosening until the whole pot smelled like something between fruit and molasses. Spooned over a bowl of oatmeal on a cold morning, they made the whole bowl smell like something your grandmother would have made on purpose, not out of necessity. A retired seamstress in rural Georgia ate this every morning for 11 years after her husband died. She made it the same way every time. Same pot, same spoon, same bowl with the chip on the rim she never replaced. She never called it a diet, she called it breakfast. But the real trick wasn't just affording the food, it was figuring out how to live with it day after day, week after week, how to make the same pot feel like a different meal, how to sit down to something familiar without feeling like you were slowly running out of options. Number 25. Potato and onion stew. 2 potatoes and half an onion. That was the whole inventory. A spoonful of bacon grease kept in a coffee tin on the back of the stove because bacon grease kept indefinitely and flavored everything it touched. The potatoes went in cubed, the onion sliced thin, the grease melted into the water until the broth turned faintly golden, and smelled like something that cost more than it did. For a widow in rural Ohio, this cost 14 cents in 1969 and kept the cold out on a Wednesday night when the temperature dropped below freezing and the furnace was running low. She made it in the same pot she had used for 30 years. The pot had a dent in the side from the time it fell off the stove. She never replaced it. It still worked. Number 24. Cabbage and sausage skillet. You didn't buy steak. Steak was for people who hadn't done the math. You bought smoked sausage because it lasted 3 weeks in the refrigerator without going bad, which meant it was the safest protein in the store for someone living alone on a fixed income. One link, sliced thin into rounds, browned in the skillet until the edges crisped and the fat rendered out. Then half a head of cheap green cabbage, shredded and dropped in, stirred until it wilted and caramelized at the edges and absorbed every bit of fat in the pan. It smelled like a feast. It cost 63 cents in 1974. A retired factory worker in southern Ohio made this every Thursday night for 6 years and ate it straight from the skillet because there was no point dirtying a plate. He would just have to wash again. Number 23. Lentil porridge. A cup of dried lentils cost 11 cents in 1971. They needed no soaking, no long preparation, no special equipment. They went into a pot with water and salt and cooked in 30 minutes into a thick, earthy stew that stuck to the ribs and kept a person full for hours. A grandfather in rural Kansas ate this 3 nights a week for 7 years after his wife died. He added a spoonful of bacon grease and a pinch of black pepper and ate it with a piece of cornbread he made in a cast-iron skillet on Sunday and rationed through the week. His doctor never had to ask about his iron levels. Number 22. Ham bone and bean soup. Nothing went to waste. The Sunday ham fed 3 meals when it was whole. When it was eaten down to the bone itself became the next 3 meals. A bag of dried navy beans cost 69 cents and soaked overnight in cold water until they swelled and softened. The bone went into the pot with the beans and enough water to cover everything, and it simmered for 3 hours on the back burner while the house filled with the smell of smoke and salt and something that felt like Sunday, even though it was Wednesday. The broth pulled every ghost of flavor from the bone. By the time it was done, the meat that remained fell from the joints in small shreds that dissolved into the soup. It fed a person for a week. Number 21. Rice and canned chicken. When arthritis made chopping impossible, this was the fallback. A can of chicken, a cup of rice, and water. No knife work, no standing at the stove longer than it took to bring the water to a boil. The rice absorbed the liquid from the can, and the chicken broke apart into soft shreds that distributed themselves through the pot without any help. It took 20 minutes from start to finish, and it required almost no grip strength, which mattered when your hands hurt every morning before you even got out of bed. It wasn't pretty. It didn't smell like much, but it meant you didn't have to rely on anyone else to eat. And for a woman in rural Tennessee in 1978 who had spent 60 years feeding other people, that independence was worth more than the flavor. But this is where things began to shift in a way that had nothing to do with recipes. It wasn't just about what you could afford anymore. It was about what would last, what you could rely on, what wouldn't go bad if you had a difficult week and didn't make it to the store. The corner butcher was gone, replaced by a massive supermarket 3 bus stops away. So you stopped buying fresh. You bought what kept. You built a bunker in the pantry. Cans didn't rot in the crisper drawer. Boxes didn't spoil if you forgot them. It wasn't about the taste anymore. It was about the shelf life. Number 20. Tomato and stale bread soup. When the cupboard was bare, this was the answer. Bread that had gone stale, torn into rough chunks, and dropped into a pot with a can of crushed tomatoes and enough water to loosen it. Simmered until the bread absorbed the liquid and the whole thing thickened into something between soup and porridge. Something that had no real name but had been made in American kitchens for 100 years whenever things got tight. A can of crushed tomatoes cost 23 cents in 1974. The bread cost nothing because it was already there, already going hard on the counter. It was cheap. It was heavy. It smelled like the end of the month. A widow in western Pennsylvania made this every time the check ran short, which was most months by the third week. She ate it hot from the pot with a spoon and did not call it anything. Number 19. Egg drop broth. When you were sick and there was no one in the house to bring you soup, you made this. A pot of broth brought to a boil, 2 eggs beaten in a cup and streamed in slow while you stirred, the eggs pulling into thin golden ribbons that floated through the liquid. Done in 60 seconds, it required almost no effort and no standing. A retired school teacher in Cleveland made it every winter for 11 years after her husband died, every time she felt a cold coming on, or the weather turned, or the house felt too large to heat properly. She told her neighbor across the hall that it was the only meal that went down easy when the house felt too big. She said the sound of the broth boiling was the loneliest sound she knew. Number 18. Corn chowder. A can of creamed corn cost 31 cents in 1978. 1 potato, cubed small. A splash of milk from whatever was left in the carton. Everything into a pot together, simmered until the potato softened, and the milk thickened the corn into something that felt like chowder, even though it had no cream, no bacon, no onion, nothing that a restaurant would recognize. Farm wives had made versions of this for generations whenever the freezer was empty and the snow was coming down and there was no point driving anywhere. The smell of it warming on the stove filled every corner of a small house that had gotten too quiet since the children left and the husband died, and the rooms stopped needing to be heated all the way. It smelled like something was happening in there. It smelled like someone still lived there on purpose. Number 17. Chili with beans. A pound of ground beef didn't mean 1 dinner, it meant 4. You made it on Sunday, the whole pound browned with half an onion and a can of kidney beans, a can of tomatoes, and whatever spices were in the cabinet. You ate it Sunday night, and Monday night, and Tuesday night, and even Wednesday night, each time reheated in the same pot. By Thursday, the pot was scraped clean, and the whole exercise started over on the following Sunday. A pound of beef cost 89 cents in 1976. 4 dinners for under $1 when you counted the beans and the tomatoes. That was the arithmetic. A retired postal worker in rural Illinois ran this calculation every week for 9 years and never once felt sorry about it. He liked chili. He liked knowing what dinner was going to be. The certainty of it was worth something. Number 16. Black-eyed pea stew, dried peas, a cheap ham hock, and water. Put it on the stove at noon and walk away. That was the whole recipe. The peas softened slowly over 4 hours, absorbing the smoke from the hock, the broth going from clear to cloudy to thick as the starch released into the liquid. By supper time, the whole pot had gone dense and dark, and the peas had nearly dissolved into something that coated the back of a spoon. For a widower in rural Georgia, this was Tuesday. It had been Tuesday for 6 years. The same pot started at the same time on the same burner, because the routine was the architecture of a life that had lost most of its other structure when his wife died in the winter of 1974. He ate it from the same bowl every time. The bowl had her name on it, written in marker on the bottom, from when they used to take it to church potlucks. But eventually, even something as simple as opening a can started to feel like work. Not because the food changed, but because the body did. The hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Standing at the stove took longer than it once had. Everything required a little more thought, a little more planning, a little more rest afterward than anyone would have predicted. And somewhere in that shift, quietly, without anyone noticing, the arithmetic changed. Number 15. Canned salmon patties. A can of pink salmon cost $1.89 at the A&P in 1978. You drained the liquid, removed nothing, mashed the whole contents with a handful of crushed saltines and a beaten egg until it held together in a loose ball, then pressed it flat in your hand and laid it into a skillet with hot oil. 2 patties over a cup of rice fed a person for 2 full meals. The soft bones dissolved completely in the cooking and were never noticed, which meant every serving contained calcium that never appeared on any label and never got counted by anyone. A retired nurse in rural Virginia made these every other week for 11 years. She knew exactly what was in them. She had spent 40 years telling other people what to eat. Now she ate what she could afford, and it was, as it turned out, fine. Number 14. Tuna noodle pot. A can of tuna, a bag of egg noodles, and a can of cream of mushroom soup. You could make it with your eyes closed because you had made it enough times that your hands knew where everything was without looking. The cream of mushroom soup turned everything it touched into something familiar, something that tasted like a casserole someone's mother would have made, which was the point. The kitchen smelled like Wednesday nights had smelled for 30 years, back when there were 4 people at the table, and someone always asked for seconds, and the pot was never quite big enough. Now the pot was more than big enough. You made the full recipe anyway and ate it over 3 nights because making less felt like admitting something you weren't ready to admit. Number 13. Beef and macaroni. 1 pot. Ground beef browned with a can of tomato sauce and a cup of elbow pasta cooked right in the liquid until it absorbed everything, and the whole thing thickened into something dense and filling and completely without pretense. It tasted like every casserole you ever made for your kids when they were young, and the house was loud, and dinner was an event that required a table large enough for everyone. Now it was scaled down to a single portion. The hardest part wasn't the cooking. It was measuring out a 1/4 cup of dry pasta and stopping there when your hands had spent 30 years measuring by the pound for a family that no longer sat at this table. Number 12. Split pea soup. A bag of split peas cost 39 cents. Water, salt. That was the whole list. You put it on the stove and you could forget it for an hour and it wouldn't burn. It just got thicker. The peas broke down completely on their own, no blending required, the whole pot turning from green water into something dense and smooth that held the shape of the spoon. A widower in Detroit kept a pot on the back burner for 3 days straight in the winter of 1979, refreshing it with water when it got too thick, eating from it morning and night, just so the house smelled like someone was home. The neighbors could smell it in the hallway. He never answered the door. He just needed the smell. Number 11. Canned corned beef hash. Fried hard in a cast iron pan until the edges crisped and the bottom turned almost black, the fat rendering out of the meat and pooling at the edges of the pan. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't look like much. But it made noise in the pan, a steady crackling that filled the kitchen and bounced off the walls and required no conversation to sustain. And the noise made the kitchen feel less empty. A retired steel worker in Pittsburgh made this 3 mornings a week through the entire decade of the 1970s. He said the smell of it hit him before he was fully awake, which was the point. Starting the day with something that made noise and smell and heat meant starting the day like it was worth starting. This is the part that rarely gets written down. Not the cost of the food, not the recipes themselves, but what it feels like to keep cooking when there is no one else in the room. To go through the same motions you have repeated your entire life and realize the room doesn't sound the same anymore. The effort is the same, the smells are the same, but the table is too large now, and the portions are too small, and somewhere between the stove and the chair, the whole thing starts to feel like a performance, with no audience. They set a plate, they washed a single fork, they went through the motions of a life that used to require a 6-piece dining set. Number 10. Chicken and dumplings. The bony cuts cost almost nothing. Backs, necks, wings, the parts that nobody else wanted, simmered in a pot for 2 hours until the meat loosened from the joints and the broth turned golden and rich with collagen and fat. Then drop biscuit dough, made from flour and shortening and a little milk. Spooned in by the tablespoon, the lid put on, 20 minutes untouched while the dumplings steamed through. Southern grandmothers had brought this in covered pots to every doorstep that needed it for 100 years. Every sick neighbor, every new widow, every house where something had gone wrong. Making it alone in a quiet kitchen still smelled exactly the same as it always had. The smell didn't know there was only one person left to eat it. Number 9. Vegetable beef soup. Whatever was dying in the crisper drawer went into the pot. Limp celery that had lost its snap, carrots gone soft at the edges, half a turnip, a couple of potatoes starting to sprout. A tough cut of chuck roast was 79 cents a pound in 1982, cubed small and browned first in the pot before the water went in, simmered for 3 hours until the meat gave up its resistance and the vegetables dissolved into the broth. It prevented food waste, and preventing food waste prevented the particular guilt that came from throwing away food you had paid for with money you didn't have. A retired school teacher in rural Missouri made this every Monday with whatever had not been used the week before. She said it was different every time. She meant that as a compliment. Number 8. Red beans and rice. It was heavy, it was cheap, and it required almost no standing at the stove, which mattered when standing was the thing that hurt most. The dried beans soaked overnight and went into the pot in the morning with a ham hock and an onion and enough water to cover everything by 2 inches. By early afternoon, the starch from the beans had broken down into a thick, smoky gravy that coated the back of a spoon and smelled like every Monday in New Orleans for the past 200 years. Served over white rice, it made a complete meal for under 40 cents. For a grandmother in rural Louisiana with a bad hip who had cooked standing up for 50 years, it meant she didn't have to surrender her independence to a microwave. She made it from the chair she had moved next to the stove. She stirred it with a long-handled spoon, and she did not ask for help. Number 7. Sausage and white beans. Smoked sausage sliced into rounds, a can of white beans drained and rinsed, a can of diced tomatoes with the liquid. Everything into the pot together, 20 minutes on medium heat until the tomatoes broke down and the beans absorbed the fat from the sausage, and the whole thing thickened into something that looked like a real dinner. A widower in Philadelphia ate this 3 nights a week in the winter of 1981. He ate it in his armchair in the living room, the hot bowl resting on a folded newspaper on his knee. He ate at 5:30 p.m., exactly when he used to eat with his wife. She had always been the one to say when dinner was ready. He kept the time anyway because it was the last piece of the schedule that still belonged to both of them. Number 6. Pinto beans and cornbread. The cheapest protein in the store, pound for pound. A 2-pound bag of dry pintos cost 35 cents in 1975 and made enough beans to last 4 days. Soaked overnight, simmered for 3 hours with a ham hock and salt and a bay leaf, eaten with a square of cornbread made in the cast iron skillet that had belonged to his mother and her mother before that. A retired mechanic in rural West Virginia kept a pot going on the back burner every winter from November to March, every year for the last decade of his working life and the first decade after. A bag of pintos meant you would never go hungry. That was not a small thing. That was the whole calculation. Number 5. Macaroni and stewed tomatoes. Sweet, acidic, and cheap. A can of stewed tomatoes poured over a bowl of boiled elbow macaroni with the tomatoes still warm from the pot and the juice soaking into the pasta. It permanently stained the plastic bowls orange, no matter how many times you washed them. A can cost 19 cents at the Kroger in 1978. The macaroni cost less than that. It was a 15-minute meal from start to finish, and it filled the silence of a Sunday afternoon in a house where Sunday afternoons had once been the loudest part of the week. A widow in rural Kentucky made this every Sunday for 8 years. She ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on. She always made too much. She always finished it anyway. Number 4. Cabbage and noodles. Fried in butter in a large skillet, the cabbage shredded thin and laid in over medium heat, stirred occasionally until it went from raw and pale to golden and soft, the edges caramelizing into something sweet and slightly bitter at the same time. Egg noodles boiled separately and tossed in at the end with more butter and black pepper. It was simple. It was fast. It was filling in the way that only starch and fat can fill you, completely and without apology. The smell of caramelized cabbage hung in the curtains for 2 days afterward, a stubborn reminder of the old neighborhood before the interstate came through and took half the houses with it. A retired school teacher in Cleveland made this every Friday. She said it smelled like her mother's kitchen. Her mother had been dead for 30 years. The smell didn't care. Number 3. Chicken thighs and rice. Dark meat was cheaper because the American food industry had spent 20 years convincing people that white meat was cleaner, leaner, better, and more worthy of the dinner table. Seniors who had been cooking since before that campaign began knew better and bought thighs for 69 cents a pound without guilt or second guessing. Browned first in the pot until the skin crisped and the fat rendered, then a cup of long grain rice and a can of chicken broth with the lid on for 30 minutes, covered on low heat. The fat from the thigh kept the rice moist and separate, and the meat came away from the bone without any effort by the time it was done. It was the meal that tasted like someone still knew how to cook, even when the table only had one place set, even when there was no one there to notice. Number 2. Depression stew. Ground beef, a can of corn, and 3 potatoes cubed rough. Everything into one pot with water and salt, simmered until the potatoes softened and the beef broke apart into the broth and the corn turned the whole thing slightly sweet. A single pot that lasted 4 days in the refrigerator, reheated one bowl at a time on the back burner. You didn't plan menus. You planned survival instead. It wasn't pretty and it wasn't supposed to be. It was defiance against a fixed income, against the arithmetic of a check that ran out before the month did, against every system that had decided this was enough for a person who had worked for 40 years and asked for very little in return. Number 1. Chicken soup. They didn't stop making scratch chicken soup because they forgot how to do it. By 1975, Swanson was running ad campaigns specifically targeting seniors living alone. They bought full-page spreads in the magazines left in doctors' waiting rooms. They bought airtime between the evening news and game shows. The label showed a bowl of soup that looked like something a person who loved you would make. Just like homemade, the label said. But it wasn't. The ones who got through it didn't live on the cans. They bought the chicken, the whole bird, or just the back and the neck, the cheapest parts, dropped into a pot of cold water with an onion and a carrot and whatever herbs were still alive in the windowsill pot. Simmered for 2 hours until the house smelled like it always had on sick days and cold nights and the days after someone died, and the neighbors brought food and the kitchen was full of people. They kept the pot going, not because it was easy, because it was the one thing that still smelled like the life they had built and not yet finished living. A kitchen built for 6, one plate on the table, the pot still simmering,